right, welcome to another edition of GFB Grown Folks Business. Glad to see some familiar faces as always. It's the ones that I can just know are always ready to engage in a topical conversation around the things that I think of. I'm truly appreciative of you guys being here. The extra hour of daylight is tempting, I know, but it makes me feel special that you're willing to spend some daytime with me since we're getting so much of it. Jay, welcome as always. I know you on the road, but you found your way here anyway. And Lisa, I hope you are settled and there also. And Bob, as always, thanks for being here. And Danya, man, what you do, you are much appreciated. Um, so tonight, I almost want to make the last few weeks we've been having some type of one thing, connected type conversation because it's just been about uh, a real focus on the human condition. I think so. Tonight, I'll say is a continuation, but it's also spurred by some events that have happened in the public sphere and entertainment and such. Um, tonight's topic is labeled "Fools and Babies." Who is responsible for you? I'm guessing some of you may get the fools and baby reference. It's kind of biblical, and Jay, feel free to expand upon it if I'm incorrect, but it's something along the lines of in regards. Hey, Vanessa, glad you can make it in here. Everybody got their little setups nice. Y'all making me want to change my stuff up. I don't know what you got going on, Vanessa, but it looks nice right there. It looks nice. Uh,
Thanks. Hey, everybody.
yeah, right. Good to see you. So I was just saying, Vanessa, tonight's topic is fools and babies. Who is responsible for you? So with that being understood, I was kind of brought here based on the last few weeks of discussion we've been having, but also um, recently in what's taking place in the world of entertainment and media and such. But I was just saying that Jay Dwayne could direct this comment in the proper direction or proper context if it's different from the way I receive it. But Vanessa, you would be someone else I would say is could do that as well as Lisa. Um, Fools and babies, who is responsible for you? I often think of the fools and babies references in biblical terms. God looks out for fools and babies. Um, so yeah, who is responsible for you? I'm again in most recent observations. There's a basketball player named Jay Morant who's dealing with suspension for malbehaviors off the court. Um, who's responsible for you comes to mind, and we're just past the 1 year anniversary of Will Smith going up on stage and slapping Chris Rock, and we talked about that at length last year on Grown Folks Business. But who's responsible for you? There's certain things that gotta kind of ask that question, and I'm coming at this from a societal level and a personal level. So if it makes sense, I'm ready to kind of dive in. Um, is there anybody who wants to further define or attempt to define what I'm speaking of, or are we ready to rock and roll? Are we similarly like-minded? So I'm talking societally and personally. Who's responsible for you? And I throw in the babies and fools aspect because yeah, that means somebody else is responsible for you, right? It's babies and fools. Um, so how do you think you came to be is my first question. And what I mean by that is in total of who you are as an individual that you recognize as the person you are. And I ask that because some of what we've discussed over the last few weeks, especially when Vanessa was here, it was kind of like, let's define this a little bit further and make it make sense for the purposes of conversation. And I like that idea. So when I ask, how do you think you how do you think you came to be? It's kind of reflecting back, if you can, instantaneously in a moment on the parts of you, the coming together of how you see yourself. And I think the people in the space right now can do that pretty quickly. Um, I can begin and go briefly. I know I am probably equal parts my mother and my father, and a lot of aspects of my grandmother. And that that background, that I call it yin and yang, the pessimism, the optimism, the love, the adoration, the appreciation, all of the things that kind of make me who I am. Also uh, lead me to a place of feeling responsible for myself, and that's in terms of what I impart into the world or society that I interact with. So I know those building blocks came from somewhere that I can easily reference or recognize. Now that was just a quick little uh, definition on my part. So I'll ask if you can go a little deeper. If this is what I'm saying makes sense to you or resonates, go as deep as you like. But you know, how did you come to be? Um, Especially now, because I think everybody on this call in these squares actually understands themselves in a complete way. And this is based on a couple of weeks of us having these really wonderful conversations. I've enjoyed the last, I don't know, 5, 6 episodes that we've had that have, at minimum had some pieces of the people that are here right now. So with that being said, if it makes sense to you, I'm going to come to you first, Jay, because I'm glad you could make the night, bro. I really felt like this was a good topic, especially after last week, because I think you missed the gym there, but you're here now. So, how do you think you came to be?
I think I would agree with you. And first of all, I will tell you I missed y'all too. And then I'm even frazzled when I'm not in my own element. I feel like I'm all over the place. But I definitely agree with you. I am a product of my environment. And unfortunately, what I do see in my older age is I'm even a product of the things I didn't want to accept or didn't realize, but everything that I've experienced up to this point influence the way that I operate and perceive life, unfortunately. Even some of those negative instances.
Indeed, I think you got to look at all of it, and that's a good. I think that's a good, honest way of viewing the parts and pieces that make up who we are. Lisa, what about you? Do you have a how do you think you came to be answer?
Oh man. Um, for me, it's a lot of introspection because I listened to your answer and now I no longer feel envious that I didn't know my mother. I didn't know her whole side of her family and the family that I was raised with. I'm not biologically connected to. So I also am not familiar with my biological father's family. But the introspection of looking at how the others behave and then assessing my thought process like, wow, that doesn't make sense to me. Why doesn't that make sense to me? Um, and I'll let you in on a conversation I had earlier with a woman around entitlements, people with food stamps and Medicaid and things like that. Someone texted me earlier about them having issues with a daycare voucher. So I talked to someone who was close to them, and they were like, "Well, I think." I understand social service shouldn't be helping people. This person is over 35 years old and they had their fifth kid and they should know better by now, and so on and so forth. But my assessment was in respect to your topic before I even knew your topic, right? Like this person who is over 35 that's had their fifth child that's expecting or wanting some entitlement assistance, they don't get it. They have no concept of the others that's like, well, you know how babies are born by now and how they're created, and you shouldn't like you shouldn't expect that the government is going to help you out when you did what you did to create this issue. So for me, how I've come to be who I am is that introspection and then watching the others and then mulling it over and trying to break those other people's perspectives down.
Yeah, in a way, I heard you say the envious. You're not envious anymore because you know when you know your origin a little bit, as Jay says, and I'm saying, you got some reference points to how you are now, and they're like, yeah, I'm being like my mother, being like my father, being like whoever that had an influence. So at least you kind of get a pass for not having that pressure, but it's there somewhere. I'm sure it exists. Bob, I'm coming to you next. If you have it in you to explain how you think you came to be.
Yeah, so I think that I should start with my parents from the standpoint that my mother was an extremely strong-opinioned, strong-willed person, and her expectation would be that I would be a particular person. And her father was also a very strong-willed and whatnot man. And there was a lot of compliance expected in that dynamic. My father, on the other hand, was passive aggressive. So he was the one that you had to please, but you didn't know how to please him until after you had failed at pleasing him. And so then you would discover how you would have pleased him. And that was very, very frustrating. At least with my mother and my grandfather, it was clear what the expectation was and what the requirements were and that sort of thing. So I grew up in that kind of environment where I really didn't have the freedom I could think what I wanted to think, and I could develop my perspectives as I wanted to develop them, but I couldn't act on them. I could not on anything until I turned 18, which happened to be right before I started college. And so I'll never forget my mother, when I was a freshman in college, asking me the question, what has happened to you? What has that school done to you? As if it had all of a sudden taken me over and ruined me. And it was because in high school, really decided, I really need to decide what I believe and what I look to be a consistent, logical value system that made sense to me, as opposed to this adopted random kind of thing imposed upon me by my family. And I really had the freedom to do that when I was in college. And that doesn't mean that part of me that was formed before that didn't serve and doesn't still serve in some ways as a core. But I did decide, I need to choose what I value and what I believe, and I need to have the freedom to perpetually reconsider, evaluate, learn, develop, extend, expand, and so forth and so forth and so forth. So long answer to a arguably simple question. I'm rooted in my upbringing. But I also think that we have the responsibility to ourselves and to the rest of the world, by the way, to come to terms with who we are and take responsibility for who we are, such that we don't blame our parents, that we don't hold them accountable, such that we don't say things like, well, that's the way I was raised. Well, what? If you were raised to beat children, you can beat children. I mean, we have to own who we are. And to do that, we have to decide that we're responsible and make our own decisions in that regard.
So I think you guys are playing along well. Great answers thus far. So the who is responsible for you is also applicable to your origin story, right? It's got to have a part there. I probably said this in the space before. I think around 14 or 16 is when you kind of have to decide, oh, I have to be more knowledgeable of who I am and how responsible I'm going to be with me going forward in life. I think that's around the age frame that you just have to get ready to flip that light switch, because some stuff is going to hit you that it's going to be up to you to decide about, and it's not going to be as clear cut as something being hot or cold, a switch being on or off. There's a little bit more nuance incorporated. So in this conversation, that who is responsible for you element is also who is responsible for kind of framing out you at a certain point. So we'll continue with Vanessa's response. How did you come to be? How do you think you came to be?
Well, everybody who's spoken already has certainly given me something to think about. And yes, coming out of a Southern Baptist background, yes, when people say fools and little children, I obviously understand what that means from my background and what it meant. Sitting in Sunday school on the bench or whatever your experience might have been, because it basically comes from the idea that when you know better, you do better. And so, yeah, I get that. But I guess kind of to add on to what's already been said and to kind of piggyback on the thought that's already out there in the ether is yes, we are complex creatures, and yes, we are certainly responsible for ourselves. But I think that sometimes, we fail to capture the missing piece. And in other words, I am a product of my environment. And so not just merely who I am as an individual growing up in my home and product of both John and Ida, who were my parents, but understanding that also the missing piece is my environmental education. And what I mean by that is that, certainly just talking, the story that, Lisa was talking about in terms of, some conversation that was had. It's I've had those conversations many times before in similar situations dealing with people. And I think it often comes up because the idea is that people know better. And yes, we'd all like to think that. And I am not giving anybody a free pass for bad behavior. But what I am saying is that you can only gamble with the cards that are in your hand. And that what I mean by that is simply that, for instance, I worked a lot of my professional career in child welfare in terms of, nobody wanted to see you come in. This is not a profession that people are, oh, so happy to see you, Miss Stubbs. Come on in and have a seat. Usually you're coming with, the police officer on one shoulder and a petition in one hand that says, hey, by the way, we validated that we have cause to think your children are being abused, neglected, or exploited. So it's never a good thing. And so oftentimes, people want to ask, well, why is something happening? Whether it's your reliance on public aid, whether it's your bad behavior around your environment, your children, what have you. But the idea is that if I have been taught, not by my parents per se, but through my environment, that certain things are in fact true, then that adds to the what I call the reification or reification of some amorphous idea that these things are one, both true, and that they maintain a standing in the life that I live. What I mean by that is simply, if I grow up in public housing and I am a third, fourth generation welfare recipient, because I've never seen anybody in my home get up and go to work, because I've never seen anybody actually work for 30 years and retire, because maybe I've been told that when I'm 18 I'm old enough to have a child, and that's the ticket to my own apartment or my own independence or what have you. That then becomes my truth. And so we have to avoid of, when we're talking about, who we are, we have to avoid the idea that we are in and of ourselves totally in control of that. So yeah, there comes a time that hopefully through an academic education, you determine that perhaps there is something about my existence or the way that I'm living that I don't necessarily care for, and I desire to change. And so that aspect of free will, am I willing to take the necessary steps to change what has been taught to me and confirmed by my environment that that is my truth, that that is what will happen. That if I'm young, Black, and male, that I will interface with both law enforcement, father or child before I'm able to take care of them financially. All of the big, all of those things that so oftentimes people who are poor or underserved hear, and it's not because they are not intelligent beings, but because this becomes their truth, not because their parents taught them that, but the world we live in sometimes gives us these amorphous cues that says absolutely what you think about yourself is accurate, or absolutely what the world thinks about you is also accurate. And so I guess that's my long way of saying, who's responsible for me? Yes, I'm responsible, but no, I don't get a free pass in terms of I'm old enough to know better. Do I take the steps necessary to change my reality? But society doesn't get a free pass either, because oftentimes that reification that takes place, it only compounds and reaffirms this circular logic that if you are in a certain situation, that then becomes your reality. If you're poor and Black, or perhaps from an underserved neighborhood, or from a bad situation, therefore you can't ascribe to do great and wonderful things. Because if that's what a person believes, and then society is constantly providing you those cues that says absolutely you cannot do this, because despite your best efforts you're going to be discriminated against, or despite your best efforts your education is going to be undervalued, despite your best efforts you're always going to have to prove your innocence to the fifth degree, as opposed to someone perhaps who is of another hue, because our justice system, despite how wonderful it is not blind. And color still has a place in those systems, and that's where we get the structural racism. So, like I said, I certainly would not reward anyone for bad behavior. Once our brains get, to be an adult, again, you're out of that fool stage, and you're certainly out of that child's phase. You're responsible for your own continuing education. And again, I'm not speaking in the academic sense, but by the same token, society has a big role in that. And that's why I think that it's so critical that we not only work to address those that are potentially dealing with issues that are a result of racism, but that we constantly work to make sure that we're asking the right questions. Because the question is not always, well, how did you get into the situation, or why did you get into this situation? It's let's pull back the layers and start perhaps approaching someone's issue from a multi-pronged approach, because getting a fish for a day and learning to fish are two totally different things. So again, apologize for taking a long time. Sometimes
No. You said Vanessa, you said a lot worth hearing. That's the difference in taking a long time. That was really good, well stated. So much that I want to get to based on what you said, but again, you guys always have a way of jumping around, because one minute I'm like, I'm gonna go to this question, next minute I'm like, I'm gonna go to this question because of something you all have shared. This is I think a topic right for now, in terms of, as you stated, society has an influence also. We are tasked with completing our own picture. So we get stuff that is the origin of us. You can not fill in that rest of that picture and end up in a situation that may not be reflective of who you actually are. So at some point, whether it is academia, just picking up a book yourself, having a good mentor, introducing yourself to some other forms of knowledge, or something that gives you a purposefulness that takes you away from being a product of your environment in totality. I think that's important. And I think that's a lot of what you were saying, Vanessa. And I thought, again, said very well. Lisa, we're going to have another conversation and interaction about words like entitlement. I think the Republican Party has done an awesome job with using certain words and turning them into things that don't even make sense for how they're being applied. I was going to say that earlier, but since it came back up a little bit, yeah, entitlement. What? So anyway, Jay, I feel like you had something you wanted to interject here, and I'll begin with you on this next statement, which again, I was bouncing back and forth because of everything that's been discussed. So what role does society play in us, in bringing us, oh, I'm sorry. What role does society play in us being responsible? So that was just alluded to. at what point do we actually acknowledge that society plays a role? Now, you know how I am about media. I think that fits front and center in this conversation as well.
I'm not gonna be bashing social media. Not on my watch. I'm joking. But
Media, not social, all media.
yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there for social media. But no, I was thinking about what Vanessa was saying, and it really put me in a reflective state, because as a Black male, I deal with that a lot, and we're both like every day I have to contend with some stereotype. Somebody has made their mind up about me before I open my mouth. How do we know? It comes out in the compliments. Oh, you're articulate. Oh, you're this, you're that. It's like they don't realize that that's coming from a place, meaning if you think that I'm articulate, you thought that I wasn't. Or people even say, like, I did a whole video on the compliment about being a good father is an insult because you're really expecting me to be a bad father and it caught you off guard. So you're like, oh, wow, you're a good father, not just me doing what I'm supposed to do. So, society, especially from a Black male perspective, we deal with this pendulum of, am I really who I say I am, or am I who people think I am, or am I how people treat me? And those things constantly happen day and day. I said this before, when I was an exec in higher ed, I never had to say my credentials. But when I started my own business, the question that comes up, what makes you qualified? Especially if I'm not selling a product or doing some type of labor or service. Me educating is perceived as an insult. Like, how dare you educate as a Black man? Who gives you the right? So those things we have to contend with a lot. So when I was thinking about what Vanessa said, like, yes, we are conditioned in-house, especially I was raised Southern, I was raised Baptist too, and in the South. So yes, we are conditioned to have some level of responsibility to ourselves, but where we don't do a good job, and the reason why I'm saying collective we don't know how to manage and navigate through life's expectations or life's stereotypes that we don't have jurisdiction over. Literally, we're living in society now where I can walk in one place and I can be perceived as a threat just because I appear to be 6 feet. And I talked about this before. I'm not even 6 feet tall, but I appear to be 6 feet. I appear to be bigger than what I am. I appear to be intimidating. I can be treated a certain way just off of that perception before I have an opportunity to advocate for myself. So it doesn't matter what my mom instilled in me. It doesn't matter what my community instilled in me. If someone or a collective unit that has a higher level of influence decides to cast judgment, I have to contend with that. So I don't think it's just a media thing. I think it's a social conditioning and a construct thing where they do have some responsibility over your life. How do we know that? We have laws that govern our behavior. And then there's the interpretation of law. It's not just the law, it's the interpretation of the law, which is based on somebody else's values and how somebody else perceive life, how they interpret these laws to now dictate how I must govern myself, regardless of the upbringing that I had, whether it's proper or not.
Yeah, the framework of society definitely has a heavy influence, I believe, on how responsible we actually feel, how responsible we act, how responsible society require, how much responsibility society requires of you. But it's a moving target, Jay, is what I think you're getting at, especially in terms of being a Black man in society, because you can do everything right and still end up on the wrong side of something. And that goes for a lot of different people, just to be clear. But Black men bear a significant brunt of bad outcomes in society, regardless of whatever their origin story is. At some points, it's a tragedy waiting to happen a lot of times. Go ahead, Jay.
No, I was just going to say, because I was thinking about Lisa, like, and I wish we would have went back to that conversation. We didn't do it. It was a while back when she talked about how talking about the way that men treat women, black men treat black women is a painful situation. Because I lived that weird little place my entire life where if you try to be that brother, or if you try to just be that person that is a positive influence, you're coming on to them, or you have an ulterior motive. If you act like you don't notice them, you stuck up. If you articulate or advocate for what you're saying, you got an attitude. It's like, it's so many different things. And it's like, but then I'm treated like trash by so many of our different counterparts. I'm talking about from a race standpoint, even gender standpoint. It's all of it. You treat it like trash, and then people come back and say, "Oh, I thought you were like that." It's I still have to find a way to address the pain that you still inflicted on me, but still treat you like a human, because I have to accept that you were ignorant to it. But it's also an expectation based off of societal norms. So we have to juggle this every day. It's almost like being a bilingual student. Like, I understand the different languages that are being spoken at one time, but it still doesn't take away the hurt that I feel, not only for me as a black man, but when I look at my black sisters, who also have been hurt by those very stereotypes that we're trying to deal with. So it's like, how do you fix it?
Yeah.
So,
if I could just, I'm sorry.
Oh no, Vanessa, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in because, certainly, Dwayne, yes, that's exactly what I was saying when I was talking about the fact that, society provides confirmation daily that the stereotypes, the bigotry, the tropes, society provides that in real time, state of the moment confirmation and affirmation that what belief systems that sometimes the majority population has, whether that's males or white females, it just doesn't matter. But whatever the majority rule is, society provides real-time affirmation, confirmation, reification that that is exactly the truth. And what I mean by that is, that's why sometimes the dialogue about a racial act versus racism becomes a place where there's a lot of emotion, obviously, and people are charged about that because any act can be racist, but racism has prongs, it has legs, it has depth, and it has longevity. And what I mean by that is if someone is perpetrating an act of racism, whether it's through language or act or whatever the case may be, and then they can reliably 100% of the time get back up environmentally, whether it's through the acceptance that white is right, or that men know better, or whatever it might be, then that says, yes, absolutely, my thinking was correct. And so there's no motivation to change there. The example that Jay and both Lisa talked about, for people of color, unfortunately, these things are not, one-offs. Specifically, my professional career, I spent a lot of time as a child welfare supervisor in this county, and I've shared that with you all before. And I distinctly remember the day that I had a call come into my office where there was a young woman, a young white female, who worked for one of our assisted living facilities. And this was during my adult services stint, same agency, just different time frame. And what she said to me is, and she was calling my office with the understanding that I am a Black female. And what she said to me was this: Miss Stubbs, can you kindly tell social worker, and his first name was Tony, I won't say his last name, but basically what she was saying was that when he spoke to her, now this young man would have to go into the assisted living facilities and do complaint investigations for the state, which means he had to ask a lot of questions. Once he was done with his complaint investigation, he had to have the director of that facility sign off, basically that he completed the investigation. Not that she approved or disapproved, but he was actually there, conducted the investigation, because we were accountable to the state. What she was saying to me, again, knowing that I am a Black female, she had no qualms about it. Because again, in her mind, there was nothing wrong with that. She says basically that when I talk to the social worker. I needed to tell him that when he spoke to her, when he approached her, he needed to sit down because, again, as Jay explained, he was 6'1", and when he leaned down as she was crossing the hallway to say, you know, Miss Johnson, can you sign off on my forms? He was tall and was looking down on her, and that, she said, was intimidating. These are not made up stories. And I'm sitting in my desk with my lip on the ground thinking, are you serious? You're actually calling my office, telling me as a Black woman that I should have no problems with telling my Black social worker that he needs to take a seat when he speaks to Miss Johnson because his mere Blackness, his mere presence, his mere height was a threat to her. And so again, I not only had to, you know, educate in the moment despite my own angst and fervor about what was going on, but then I have to go back and talk to my worker and explain to him that yes, I had this conversation, and no, I would never, under no circumstances, ask an individual to have a seat when they have a conversation with someone, not because of anything that he did, not because he was poor at his job, because he was actually very good and one of the best, but his mere height difference proposed a threat. And so what I mean by that is in many, many situations that phone call is made and people acquiesce to that behavior because what they're saying is there is nothing wrong with you making that request. There is nothing wrong with you feeling that way. And therefore everyone else who has a problem with is the person that has the issue. They're the racist, or they're the people that, rabble rousers and they're trying to create angst and confusion amongst the racists. No, that's not what's being said. What's being said is that this is not a one-off, and we are respectfully, kindly asking people to look deeper and at least engage us in dialogue about why when someone says something like that, that is so deeply offensive that it's almost a visceral reaction. And yes, there are times that literally you have to pump the brakes.
We needed you earlier for the RELC discussion, Vanessa. That's a perfect observation that would have fit very well into what we were talking about in terms of your understanding racial equity and how you view certain things now that you may encounter. And I know that was a while ago, but you had that knowledge anyway. But yeah, the society has a framework.
It's every day, Felton, but thank you.
Absolutely.
And I'm so sorry I could make it today. Had a coalition meeting, but next time.
Yeah, you good. You good, Vanessa. Society has a framework, and it is something that's established that requires us to be something you may not be. That's why we're here right now talking about, who's responsible for you, because you got to make up your mind to be responsible for yourself is at the underlying core of this. So I want to get to Lisa because I wanted to hear your response to this because of what you started to show off with, something that has to do with society and what it makes accessible to certain people. But, at the same time, you had a good back and forth kind of with this young lady's responsibility to herself and the challenge of society continuing to be responsible for certain behaviors. So I'm interested in what role does society play in us being responsible?
So what's interesting is I looked at this particular situation from a compassionate perspective and a sociological perspective, that to Vanessa's point, we expect people to know things because we know it. So this particular person, she did have 4 children already, but this last child was her only child that she had within the confines of marriage. Now, I didn't have this conversation with her, but in my head, I'm thinking I could understand, even if she should know better at 35, that she may not have a full capacity to understand the financial ramifications of this particular thing. She could be thinking, wow, I finally got validated, right? And especially if she was raised in a certain way, I finally got validated. He wifed me because, to my understanding, her other children are by that same person. And we get to have this kumbaya child that's going to be acceptable. And then and she could have also had some unrealistic ideas about support. right? So I've been spending like a whole day thinking about this, because my conversation with the other person was because I was at the budget town hall with Guilford County last night, and the budget town hall is about where y'all want us to spend this $833 million. And in the realm I was last night, it was some other people who were talking about pay the firefighters, pay the EMS, paramedics, the sheriff's department. But in another town hall, it was about, entitlements, and I use that word because that's the socially acceptable word for, social services. So that's why it even came up. But I can understand that if this person hadn't, their perspective hadn't changed, they hadn't been engaging in someone that could drop little nuggets to make them think about the ramifications of those choices. If they don't get finances, and guys, I've been pretty vulnerable and saying, I mean, I'm way over middle age at this point, but it's parts of finances I'm just now understanding. So with that being understood, that you don't know what you don't know. So what part do I advocate? Because this is how that person was like, no, you should advocate that they put more money with the sheriff and the EMS because they're out there fighting for their life. Versus this lady needs daycare, right? And whether her mind is all the way there or not, does that mean that her child doesn't get access to quality early childhood education? It is a tough situation for me to even, qualify, because I can understand both sides. But to the other thing I wanted to say is that apparently I've been thinking about this question all day. I talked to Jared, and y'all know Jared's been on the show a time or two. I talked to him about a half hour ago. He called me about the pallet houses here, and he had some things to say, and he got pretty passionate about it. And I said, well, that sounds like a pretty dramatic perspective. And he was like, oh my God, you're berating me. And I was like, really? Because I said that's a dramatic perspective. And he says, well, now you're hurting me. So my question, so this one I thought about your question. I said, well, what about what I said hurt you? Because I did think I said, I'm just expressing what I'm receiving. So your question is, who's responsible, right? If we're having a conversation and I'm receiving your reaction to something to be dramatic based on our social definition of the term, does that mean I stopped talking because you said you got hurt? But I want to know what hurt you about what I said. Now, he couldn't qualify that because he was in his feelings, and he said it hurt him because I'm his mama. And I said he was being dramatic. Well, no, I need more than that. So this is a really loaded question, because it's like, what part do I get to freely participate in the conversation? And then what part do you own that there's a textbook definition of dramatic? Okay. And based on what you're saying, it sounds dramatic. Like, oh my God, why wouldn't they let me do? And I hurt your feelings because I said you're being dramatic. But anyway, so I love the topic.
Yeah.
So I went all over the place with that. But
no, I'm just glad to hear you talk about, the feelings thing in that way. The feelings thing in the, let me keep talking because it can't be that serious type of situation. So I appreciate that you recognize sometimes feelings don't have a place in the conversation. Go ahead, Vanessa.
I just wanted to jump in because Lisa said something that just kind of brought it to mind. When I was speaking earlier, again, about the aspect of our social education, and again, very specific, not academic, but our social education and what happens and is validated or not validated in our day-to-day walk, that thing that becomes so powerful, because like I said, it is something that's ill-defined, it's amorphous, no one can quite put their finger on it. And I say all that to say this: there have been countless studies done, about the power of the word. Back when I worked for social services, it was at-risk families, challenged families, whatever the social, word, was acceptable at the time. Every 10 years or so, there will be a shift and it'll change again. But even now, the issue of entitlement, again, that's just not some random word that was chosen. It was chosen to elicit a certain response from the white majority, and that is textbook. Anybody that wants to do the research search, have at it, because it was chosen, because basically what it says is that you have a group or a subsection of individuals that are receiving something that they are, quote, entitled to. And entitlement, the definition is real clear. It basically, again, what does it say here? The fact of having a right to something. And so issues of whether or not people have worked and paid into Social Security, do we call that an entitlement when you've actually, and I guess that's a hot button for me, because you guys have heard me say my husband is retired military. The government didn't give him a darn thing. I dare anybody to talk to me about the blood, sweat, and tears, the fact that he's paid with his physical body and years of his life based on something that he was doing as a part of his job. Now, I get that during periods of people's lives, sometimes they are either unable due to sickness, poverty or whatever, and sometimes not being able to work. But again, the idea of getting at a solution that this does not become a as we called in the Baptist church, generational curse, and you've got, second and third generations, growing up in poverty or whatnot, then you have to change the thinking around that, because just as, the non-minority population is considering this an entitlement, or feeling like people feel like they are entitled to something simply because maybe they're Americans. You've got the other part of the population that, again, entitlement. Oh, I'm entitled to receive those benefits because they are, in fact, entitlements. And so we've got to really look at, one, how we term things, and then the power that we then mobilize behind those words when we are dealing with issues, especially hot button social issues where people are talking about, where do we put the money? I was always told, you can pay now or you can pay later. And so I'd much rather fund maybe early education or, something like that than to totally ignore and put blinders on to the needs of the poor and perhaps uneducated, or whatever someone's challenges might be, when ultimately those things will come full circle. And what happens is the society continues to say the same thing. In other words, it affirms that whatever we're thinking about those things, whether it's the right or the left, the reification, the society, that vicious circle continues to confirm, both on the right hand and on the left hand, that those things that we think about them, and I don't mean individuals, how we think about those programs, how we think about individuals in those circumstances, it tends to confirm, for lack of a better term, that those things are true. So why not why do something differently if what we're hearing, thinking, experiencing every day is confirmation of our worst ideas around these subjects?
You just let it fail at some point, because you just have decided it's not going to work, even though you didn't really put forth the honest effort, in my opinion. And to answer that question really quickly, and Bob, I'm coming to you right with two things, and then we're going to go around the room. You guys have one left to answer before we get out of here. But I believe, societally speaking, there's a responsibility that exists for better outcomes for all. And I totally agree with the insistence that those potential for better outcomes begin at an impressionable age, at a time where you can get in there and create that framework and allow for that completion of that picture, that person or individual complete the picture in a positive way, because they've been fully informed. And sometimes they still turn out to be whatever they turn out to be, but at least it'll be with the complete knowledge of who they could be at a certain point in their existence, and not finding out at 35, 40, 50 years old, oh, I could have just did this and been different. It might have been a different situation. Bob, coming to you, you got two things to respond to, and we'll get around the room and get out of here for this evening. So one of them is something that I think was brought up a couple weeks ago in a different conversation, but it'll be in the economic realm, and that'll be for everybody to respond to lastly. But feel free to get some things off your chest you wanted to anyway during the process. But what role does society play in us being responsible? And if you can commingle that with why we place an undue expectation of maturity on, I said, professional athletes, entertainers, on young people that come into economic gains. It's like when they get somewhere, just because they get some money, there's this automatic thought that they're supposed to have some maturity and responsibility, that responsibility word that they may not have been conditioned to have at this point. And I'm kind of alluding to the Jay Morant situation. So anyway, I know there was a lot. If you can process all that, or if you need a reminder, just let me know.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we've got to do this next week. We've got to have part 2, because I can't answer that without responding to all the content that has happened since you last you asked me early in the conversation tonight, and I'm thinking, oh, cool. And then you give all this space of content, and then ask me to clean it up, so sweep it up. And I mean, Vanessa, I'm always grateful to the commentary for the people on this, on the squares. Vanessa's comments tonight, I have to be especially grateful, because she has added a dimension and an element of this that is critically important, I think. And every single word she has said tonight, I think, is really, really important. And you know, for me, given my background, it goes without saying that family experience is the first filter into social experience. But social experience also mimics family experience in some ways or another. And so when I commented about the strength of my mother and the strength of my grandfather, okay, as a kid, that's oppressive, right? It's also, though, a model that says I can be strong. And it's a model that says I can be affirmative. It's a model that says I can tell the world whatever I want to tell the world because I can. It's a model that I had, even though as a kid, it was oppressive. And a key thing, I think a really key thing about how we become is what we are exposed to and what we can see and what we can look at and see as examples. And if we're not able to see examples other than this or this or this, then how do we imagine that anything else is possible? And so Vanessa's talking about that aspect of the environmental aspect of growing up, which is absolutely true and absolutely critical. And that unto itself is such a foundational difference between people of certain circumstances and people of other circumstances. And we have to bring that into the conversation and have to bring that into our understanding of who we are and how we feel like we can become. Because if we don't have that, we don't know that we can become. We don't know that we have different options. We don't know that we can break out of this because we don't have any reference points that aren't what our experience and our world and our society box us into. And so I thank you, Vanessa, for all of that.
I appreciate that, Bob. And you made a good point because we're at the time and I don't want to keep people beyond 8 o'clock at this point tonight because the next question I think warrants that. But since we have been encouraged to have a part 2 to this discussion, I'm more than willing to I don't know if we'll be on next week because I'm gonna go up to I think Lisette's having getting a new job party, which is for some people that for familiar with Lisette, wonderful individual, great person. And I think she's having a little gathering. So I think I might go to that next week. And then comps are the following week, that thing that's been looming on me. So if it's not a 1 week, it'll be a 2 week hiatus. But either way, we will reconvene. And I need promises from the people that are here right now that they'll be back in 1 to 2 weeks, because this is the unfinished business of grown folks business. I want to get to that question about this level of expectation we place on people that ascend economically to just do better. It just becomes a thing that's associated with that. And that Jay Morant situation kind of just got my attention. I'm watching the media and the people in the media. You can't do that. You got millions of dollars. What if you only had $2 on the line, but it meant you needed to act like you had some sense and carry yourself with a respectability and understanding of what might be a cliff for you to walk off of if you don't be careful. So $2 or $2 million, the motivation should not be money. I think you guys get that, but I'm definitely interested in hearing more. Thanks, Don. Appreciate you. Been too long.
I'll be here.
Been too long, Don. Go ahead, Jay.
I'll be here. No, I'll be here. I just want to say Vanessa was on fire tonight. Vanessa was on fire. She was on fire tonight.
Jay, my screen is hot. Hey, look, man. Look.
Stop.
I appreciate your vow. Vanessa, are you unmuting to have a vow of attendance at the next time we talk about this?
Hey, you say the word. I'll make sure I make every effort to be there. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
We got to have y'all
Thanks,
back.
Lisa.
Lisa, I have your pledge. I have your thumbs up. You gonna be here?
Unfortunately, I can't say, because I was looking at my calendar and I'm slated to have a vacation, and I may be traveling on that day on my way to the vacation, because spring break starts for my last child on the 7th. So my plan is to leave on the 6th. But if I can,
that's the 2 weeks. That's the 2 weeks out. Look, I might try to make it happen. We'll figure it out. But if it's not next week and it's not the week after, then it might be that week, Lisa. But we'll get it together. Hey, look, I appreciate y'all regardless. Bob, you the one that recommended. I know I got your pledge. So, Jay Dwayne, Vanessa, Lisa, Bob, thank you all so much. It's always a pleasure. And I mean, this is always worthwhile. And I hope it's resonating with others outside of Don. But Don, it's good to see that you watching. Take care. Danya, thanks for what you do. Y'all have a wonderful evening. And I think we got 2 more minutes of daylight. So